So if you talk and look at the space industry, they typically talk about things like upstream, ground, and downstream. And you'll see that the downstream part is a whole bunch of different things, applications across all these different products and services. And there's a few trends down the bottom, which I'll go through in some way, in a different way. But basically, there's this idea of the traditional kind of way we look at, and the way that the industry kind of looks at itself. People building satellites and launching them. People, we talked about mega constellations, also private space stations. We'll show a little bit about that. We'll talk about in-space manufacturing, reusable launches, etc. That's all seen as upstream. Ground segment is very much the way that we control all these things, and also the way that we manufacture these things, and then downstream the services. So that's kind of a traditional way of looking at it. This McKinsey approach is slightly different, where they tried to break it down differently. So I encourage you again, I'll drop a link in the chat at the end where you can go find this, but it's not hidden away anywhere, complicated. And basically this idea that we're seeing a lot of growth right across this value chain. People talk about the backbone, which is they split it up into private and government, state-sponsored, and then they split these up into those four areas: services and end user equipment, infrastructure and support, and then civilian and defense, right? It's just as alternative ways to split those up. And then reach, which is where you see the impact. And so you'll see that more than half of the growth we are expecting is going to be in that reach area. And in fact, arguably, there's an argument that we may see even more growth in this reach area because of, when direct to cell has only really just started to appear and is only really, become technically demonstrable around the world. And so we're seeing an incredibly fast uptake of direct to cell. And I don't believe these numbers took account of that communications piece. So I'm going to kind of focus on one or two of these areas, but you'll see when we talk about applications, it's this top right: communications, positioning, navigation and timing, Earth observation. Now, I'll dive into the applications side, and we've got a list of some of these down here. These are all mostly commercial: Earth observation, infrastructure and support, communications, position, navigation and timing, right? So these are things that traditionally have either been subsidized by or purchased by governments. In the case of PNT, position, navigation, timing, they've often just been delivered as a free public good, but they get purchased from private companies. And all the timing that we use in our society comes from space. You go to the bank, you take out money from the bank, and you get a little, some people even still do this. You get some cash and you get a little slip of paper. The number on that slip of paper, the time, is actually provided by the GNSS GPS spacecraft, which have the most accurate clocks that we've ever built. And we've chosen to fly them in space, corrected for relativistic effects, I will add. Similarly, in Earth observation, we wouldn't be able to give you more than 1 or 2 days weather forecasting now. We wouldn't be able to estimate the market value, in some cases, of retail in, say, North America without counting the cars in the car parks, or what might be the amount of oil and gas that might be in national reserves by looking at the relative height of gas or oil storage facilities, which often have roofs that move. There's all these areas where Earth observation is coming in to give us the climate change mitigation measures. How much carbon are we mitigating? We're starting to see people measuring the average heat of the Earth. I've been working with a startup that has been able to fingerprint methane, so they can tell whether methane has come from burping cows or from oil and gas or from some natural mineral process. And so they can work on mitigating that. And in infrastructure and support, we're also seeing things like LiDAR and other synthetic aperture radar services coming in, which can literally give you millimeter level elevation detection from space. So you can see when, for example, the tailings dam on a mine site might start shifting. People are starting to use space assets to monitor those things remotely with no people involved to give them triggers when they should worry about things. And that's true of major public infrastructure projects like digging tunnels for trains and cars underneath the city. Other buildings going to start slipping. Are we going to have all of these insurance claims and claims for compensation? That's already happening through space observation. But I think what's interesting, I've got what to watch for. People are talking about the privatization of position, navigation, and timing. They think that if that's privatized, there could be an explosion of new applications. Because it's become such a core part of society, that perhaps that's something where a deeper public-private partnership could be operating. I think another thing to watch for, which I didn't put a note in, apologies, is where Earth observation in particular, which I'll dive into. I did put a note. Earth observation, which we're also seeing, a reasonably big growth in. I personally believe this growth is underestimating the potential, because I imagine, the Earth observation industry for most of its life has been about specialists selling to specialists. And what we're seeing now, suddenly, a lot of startups bringing in new instruments, multispectral, hyperspectral cameras, new low power, small form factor synthetic aperture radar, a whole lot of other data sets coming in, like the methane detection. And I think we're going to start seeing a shift from people making maps as kind of like as a service, as an infrastructure piece, to actually decision support. So I think what I'm interested in looking for is someone like a Bloomberg, a Thomson Reuters, someone like that, actually buying a space company and starting to feed their data into their screens, so that market makers can make better decisions about commodities, about different valuations at scale, about the next crop, or the water reserves and the pressures that entails. And as AI, I think, also starts to come into things, I think AI is going to want that data to provide more accurate predictions, more accurate forecasts. And so my sense is Earth observation is one of those areas where we haven't had enough commercial folks like yourselves getting involved and sort of thinking about the econometrics, the social dynamics that could be enabled by being able to look down and see. And of course, the whole world is transparent. You don't get to stop Earth observation spacecraft taking photographs of what you're doing. And so there's this great drive towards transparency as well. So, there's certainly a defense and a security aspect to this, where people are using it to interdict illegal fishing. They're using it to police their borders. They're using it to even understand the movement of animals or people who might be refugees or might be suffering from, the effects of extreme climate change on their livelihoods and their ability to live in a particular area. So I think Earth observation is a very exciting area, and I personally have a sort of a strong interest in how this is going to evolve for clean water, for managing climate change, for managing infrastructure at scale, Jonathan.
Really, I do. I would love to double click there just now. You gave this example of Bloomberg potentially buying a space company. And I see it's hard not to notice that the two highest growth categories on this chart are finance and insurance,
Right.
which is very interesting. Could you just expand a little bit, besides where you think this will transform finance or insurance? Is it primarily in better forecasting and better data clarity? Is there some other higher frequency trading, or what else could we imagine the impact on investing or finance be?
I'll give you some specific examples. So, for example, finance in Australia, the largest lender to agriculture is the National Australia Bank, and they lend money to farmers to buy seed and also to buy farming equipment and to buy things like fertilizer and all sorts of other inputs into the cost of, producing that food. And flip side, one of the largest insurers in Australia is IAG Group. And they insure those same crops. They insure whether the season is going to not be as good as they'd hoped. They're ensuring whether the returns are going to be there, right? Now, they manage to come up with financial products and insurance products at a reasonable risk premium because they have good models to forecast what's going on. Well, newsflash, guess what? For the last 5 years, those models started to break down. Climate change is being seen in different species of pests, different species of beneficial insects and plants are appearing at completely different times than is normal. The last 30, 40, 50 years of data, these things are happening at these times, so that if you have those in your model, you'll be pretty, oh, it's all changing. Suddenly we're seeing things changing. We're seeing climactic zones moving. For example, warmer climactic zones are moving south in Australia. They'd be moving north in the Northern Hemisphere, where most of you are. And so we're starting to see that these, just in agriculture alone, huge amounts of insurance and finance are involved. Of course, cities as well. People are looking at things like heat islands in cities. And when there's a heat island in the city, not only is there an impact on the health and well-being of the population, and so there's more elderly people who are suffering from heat stroke, which puts stresses on the health system. There's also more demand on water. There's more demand on the water infrastructure. And flip side, if you manage to make an intervention, planting more trees, changing your local codes for buildings, bringing in sustainable technologies rather than just jamming everything with an air conditioner, then that gives you different data. So what we're seeing is space actually is able to ground truth, or rather take a ground truth on the ground and then scale it up. So you might have, okay, I need to understand what the health impacts of global warming might be across my insured base in the state of a major state in India, for example, right? So around New Delhi. And they might say, okay, well, there's 100 million people. This is their current demographic breakdown. This is the kind of expectation we have for health costs. But if we lift by 1 degree and we have these peaks of up to 5 degrees and we have these humidity situations, we're going to have, wow, we're not ready. That's the kind of stuff that we're seeing where asset values are going to be scrutinized, and risks around those systems and those annual or multi-year processes in infrastructure that governments are going to start to need to use. And a bushfire can wipe out the carbon capture of an entire crop that might have been planted for that reason, for example. And so that will have a finance implication if we're issuing carbon credits or some other form of secondary commodity to help drive to incentivize protection of biodiversity, protection of lands that absorb carbon, etc. And we've actually securitized that in some way. We're going to need to know that data. And if we're having to send people out to lab test every single hectare of the ground, that's just going to be too expensive. So space is going to be a really important part of that, we believe.
Terrific, thank you. Is there more on applications that we want to talk about, or do we want to talk a little bit about kind of from a policy and geopolitics standpoint where we are, what might be holding us back?
Let's dive into that. I was going to cover off this very briefly, which is we do have a very interesting area in space manufacturing, which is a nice segue into the geopolitics piece, which is we're starting to see pharmaceuticals being manufactured in space. We expect to get perfect crystals made in orbit, which potentially mean chips that use 20 to 30% less energy. Take a chip that uses 20, 30% less energy, put it out in every single data center in the world, and you can imagine how much that's worth. And things like fiber optics, pure, very, very pure fiber optic cables where the speed of light is higher and/or the frequency range that you can pump into a fiber optic cable is broader. You need less repeaters and so forth. Those are the sorts of things that we're looking for to do in space, as well as hopefully you and I getting a chance to go and spend some time up in orbit at some point, I hope. But certainly, people are looking at this kind of capability, and they're looking to fly this kind of facility. This is a facility sized to fit on top of that Falcon Starship rocket, that Starship rocket from SpaceX, literally 12 meters diameter, with people in it. And in fact, some of these things may not have people in them in the end because people make mess and they make vibration and they disturb things. So it could well be that these actually end up being automated. We certainly had something like this happen last Friday in Australia. We had a US company, Varda, was given a license by the Australian Space Agency to land this capsule in the Kaniba test range, which is a special purpose range that the First Nations people in charge of that area had proposed and have set up. And there's this exciting element of bringing things down from space. that are manufactured, and we think Australia could be a world leader in this because of our legal and regulatory regime, and the fact that we're a lightly populated country. Of course, so lots and lots of people, to your geopolitical question, are interested in this space and have been for a long time. The US, of course, has been the leader. China is coming up very fast. These numbers are from a few years ago, so I wouldn't be surprised if China is bigger than this. Japan has also committed a lot more just recently into their Space Innovation Fund. But you do get a picture of how everybody is recognizing that space is pretty critical. These are world government expenditures, not whole economies. This is just government spending. And of course, a number of it is for defense purposes because of the challenges that we have. Now, I was talking about Earth observation previously. Here's an example of a geopolitical thing. This is a vision taken from orbit of the 2020 bushfires in Australia. And you'll see how this beautiful, exquisite satellite has managed to track the flow of the soot from the fire across the Pacific Ocean, right? All the way across the planet until actually making landfall in South America. This is literally wind going right across the Pacific Ocean. And so there's this recognition that, in a geopolitical sense, forgetting about space, there's a recognition that space illustrates how we're all neighbors. We all share this atmosphere, we all share this environment. We are able to get this extraordinary data from space, and we're able to kind of show how space is affecting things. Here's another way to think about the geopolitical implications. This is what it might be looking like if you're sitting on the ground, one night, and you have a little time machine and you're able to speed up time a little bit quickly. This is real data, and you're looking up at the sky and you're seeing these satellites go by because you have amazing vision. You can see the actual shape. And using this tool, which is on the Leo Labs website, I'm going to switch our perspective to one that encompasses the whole Earth. And what you see here is real data, although the sizes, of course, are magnified of these spacecraft, but real data on the locations of space debris in orbit around the Earth. And space debris that is all traveling around 7 kilometers per second. So relative velocities in some cases might be up to 14 kilometers per second. And this necessity for us to actually start to have, really, I think, a civilian-led space traffic management regime like we have in aviation. These are the Starlink satellites from a few months ago, by the way, just to show you what I've selected there, just to show how these ones are in a specific set of orbits. But these spacecraft are having to do more and more maneuvering to avoid the debris that has accumulated in space over the last 50, 60 years. And these are the Leo Labs radars that they've been building. And so I think the important thing is there's another, geopolitical, to your point, what's this global space traffic market going to be like? I'm an investor in one space traffic company that is an inspector, Leo Labs, and in another one called HEO Space. But we really don't know how this is going to go. And I think there's an opportunity for us to come together like we did after World War II, when we created the International Civil Aviation Organization, which controls world aviation traffic. And that's an organization I'm pretty sure they're in Switzerland. And if they change a regulation in Switzerland, it's automatically law in Australia. It's automatically law in America. It's automatically law in China. It's automatically law in Russia. It's a brilliant international convention to make it so that when a pilot is approaching air traffic control in a country, they know that they will be speaking in English. They will be doing the approach with these nouns and verbs. They will be using this navigation system, these frequencies to speak on, etc. And the level of aviation, of course, safety that we experience today is as a direct result. So space needs this. And so there's a business opportunity to watch for, which is how can we sort of start to see a less contested and less militarized space. Right now, a lot of people see the business opportunity in militarizing space, and a lot of people see the opportunity in, detecting what's going on, figuring out, okay, what's Russia doing, what's China doing, what's America doing, what are all these different powers doing? The Europeans also are interested because there are sovereign implications. What we are seeing is the different powers testing each other. We're seeing satellites coming up close to other satellites, within a few kilometers, and formation flying with them. And that's almost an indication of capability in a time of crisis and conflict. So we want, I think that to be kind of the temperature to be dialed down a bit and there to be more dialogue. Certainly I want that, because I think that would be good for long-term business. So there is opportunity in trying to bring in that transparency. There's opportunity in bringing in that international relationship piece, Jonathan. I just thought I'd chuck in on the left-hand side the implications if we don't do it. That's the result of a hypersonic projectile, much, much, much slower than a spacecraft, only a few thousand meters per second, impacting that piece of metal and the damage that it can do. So, going back to our point about space is social infrastructure, our social infrastructure is at risk from in-orbit collisions. And that risk is increasing as the number of spacecraft increase. And so that there's a super exciting opportunities is to get involved in building this infrastructure in space. And at the same time, we also have this other opportunity, I think, and obligation for future generations and for one another, that we don't go down this path of militarizing space. We don't go path, we find a way to make it less contested. So that I think that's one of the points. The other opportunity that is coming up is in the race. People call about the race for the moon and beyond. In certainly space is becoming, I think, across the world, all of the countries that are doing space now, India, China, the Western sphere, are using a public-private partnership model increasingly, which I think is very exciting. And so exploration, where the government, instead of making everything, starts to say, we're going to buy an outcome from industry, I think is a big area. Artemis, of course, is one of the biggest, the Artemis program. There's now, I think, well over 50 countries part of this. We'll see how the US relates to this program that they birthed under the Trump administration. But certainly people see incredible socioeconomic benefits on the ground here on Earth for being participants in a project that's going to take people to the moon and back and teach us how to live there, teach us how to cope with energy, teach us how to handle health, teach us how to handle all sorts of different challenges, just as the ISS has been such a fantastic thing. And the infrastructure that we're seeing, all sorts of countries, China, India, where we're bringing human beings more and more into space is so exciting. And so how can exploration and that higher value, a higher ideal, also drive a growth of commercial opportunities? So here's an example of something that was presented a couple of years ago at through Euroconsult in the session there. So it's a little out of date now, but it included the missions that have been launched in exploration, like the James Webb Space Telescope, Axiom, and its first crewed mission in 2022, the first Artemis launch, and then increasingly commercial crew, commercial space stations. We've got this thing called CLIPS, the Commercial Lunar Program, where the Blue Ghost lander and Intuitive Machines and iSpace are all landing, moon landers right now. And meanwhile, we've had both Indian and Chinese private companies underneath government contracts landing lunar landers on the far side of the moon. So we're seeing pretty exciting thing, and I think this commercial opportunity is a big one, and this vision ultimately of landing the upper stage of the Starship on the moon here and sort of building out a moon base is part of how people were thinking about Artemis. And then of course people are thinking about Mars, and they're thinking about how might we put people on Mars? How might we explore a place on the surface of Mars where there are some amazing things to discover, and also incredible things to discover about ourselves. This is just, by the way, one of my favorite places that I'd love to visit, which is a canyon on Mars. And you'll see in this area that there's actually a bridge, which is approximately 150 meters across over the top of this canyon. How fun would it be to stand on that canyon on the surface of Mars while exploring this whole area and understanding more about ourselves and how we can create systems for living on the Earth. And so these are the kind of concepts that people are coming up with, and you'll see a whole range of things that might be relevant to how we deal with building more homes for people on the Earth, 3D printed buildings, recycling systems, systems that also include environments where people won't go nuts. People will feel they can handle the isolation of being on Mars. They can handle, environments where they're, comforted as human beings. All this kind of thinking is coming out of imagining what it would be like to be on a 3-year mission and needing to have, to maintain your humanity. And so I think every single one of these things that have been created by an architect, in this case, of a potential moon-based concept, every single thing they're thinking about, how do we bring these innovations back to Earth to lift the average, life expectancy, health outcomes, wellness, and just general happiness and well-being of people on planet Earth. And so that's kind of the idea behind this. And I think there's a huge amount of STEM business opportunities in here. There's a huge amount of media opportunities. I see there's opportunities in agriculture. And of course, a lot of people, we haven't really had enough time to talk about it, but a lot of people are seeing how sending humans to zero gravity or lower gravity triggers all sorts of responses from the body and illuminates a whole bunch of systems that we didn't even know were operating. And so drug discovery is being accelerated quite significantly right now, especially for older people, things like bone density. There's a whole class of drugs that have been released that have been developed based on learnings from space, the way that astronauts were losing their calcium in their bones. I worked out that that was because a particular hormone was being turned off. And so they worked out that, okay, that's an important hormone. Maybe older people have that hormone being turned off too. And lo and behold, they were right. And so this is the kind of thing that we're seeing we want to have as a benefit from deep space exploration, and a justification for it. And we're seeing it as a commercial thing, not as something that, government, every single thing you see in the picture is being created and put there by a government. In fact, that there's a commercial model behind all of this all the way along, and huge opportunities for international collaboration, for commercial collaboration, and for spin-off benefits into all of the massive industries we have on our planet. Jonathan, how was that?
That is just fantastic. And what an inspiring place to leave it. I have a little daughter, and so I'm really thrilled at the idea that she could visit this place someday. I realize we're coming in the hour, and we have we usually give ourselves 15-20 minutes for Q&A. So I'd like to invite anybody in the audience with questions, either to use the chat function or use the raise your hand, or just throw on your camera and shoot out a question to Tim. I have a million questions, but while people are getting their thoughts together, I'd just like to ask Tim. You mentioned that you do make investments in this space, and I know you're an advisor at an incubator. How do you think, as an investor, how do you evaluate opportunities in the space economy? What do you look for? What's most important to be an effective space investor?
Yeah, so I'm usually looking for 3 things, and I'm usually going very early stage, just to be clear that I'm not some high net worth individual. But one of the things that I look for, of course, is the founders have a vision, and also that they have a capacity to learn. The industry is in a sort of a pedagogical state of flux right now, where there are some people who are like, no, this is how you do a space mission. And then there are other people who are like, but why? But why? But why? And so that process of kind of evolving the craft, I'm looking for people that are really trying to evolve the craft of space. So that's my first criteria. That's that aspect of a learner, a player, a founding team that has those usual characteristics as well. People that are resilient and have a vision. The second thing I'm looking for is that they have a really good understanding of both terrestrial markets and space markets. And if they don't have a terrestrial market, that they have a really good understanding of who might buy the product, or a way to test that. And so I've invested in, for example, HEO. They're a space data company, and they had a vision of taking photographs from space of other space objects. And what excited me was when they realized that in-space asset inspection was not a thing. Once people had launched their satellites into space, they had actually only data coming down from the satellite itself. They could never really get a photograph of it. They could never really double check whether the antenna, the solar panels, or any of the other aspects, its pose in the orbit were correct or not. They're all trying to second guess it. And so they had a brilliant insight into that there is a gap in the market that we think we can go after in the space economy. And we know what our customer looks like. So I think other companies I can think of are spin-ins. I really like companies that are spinning in technology from automotive or from medical or from other areas into solving a space problem. I love those companies very much. People have already got, for example, we are coaching a company called MP Space. The founders are ex-Tesla battery engineers. They understand scale manufacture of batteries for homes and for cars. They've worked out how to make millions of them. And when they came and had a look at how batteries are made for space, they realized that space was actually quite a long way behind the state of the art for the domestic and transportation batteries we have. And so there's an opportunity right there. And then they didn't say, oh, well, we're going to make better batteries. They said, well, the battery is the core of the entire spacecraft. If you don't have power in space, you're dead. So they realized that there was also a way that they could start to be the heart of a new space company. And I think the final thing is I generally, invest early stage. I generally try to go on a journey with them and advise them in the ways that I can. And I try to always make sure that I give an opinion rather than tell them how things are. I think this, but I could be wrong, but this is my opinion. And so people who are the third criteria is people who put themselves in a situation where they are exposed to a lot of skilled opinions from experts, from accelerators, from the customers, from partners. So people who've not just said, okay, I'm gonna do this amazing thing, solve this amazing problem. I've got this insight, but I'm gonna go and do that quietly in a corner and then pop out this at the end. I don't invest in those companies. I like companies that are actively seeking feedback all the time, working inside accelerators, working inside things like Y Combinator or the National Space Industry Hub we have in Australia, or the Creative Destruction Lab that works around the world, or many other programs like that. I like space startups and deep tech startups to be going into those spaces and getting the extra support they need, because their path to market, the time it will take them to get to market, is probably going to be longer than your average internet company.
Terrific. Open to questions from the audience. Benjamin asks, thanks, Tim. What is the level of cost reduction for satellite launches on Starship versus the smaller rockets?
Oh, that's a really tricky question. I'll have to work that out, actually, I think. But the expectation, it's a nuanced thing, right? Because you only get that cost reduction on Starship if you fill it up. So we are expecting that we're going to get something like a 20x reduction from Falcon 9. We're gonna get down to tens of dollars per kilo to orbit, but it would only make sense if you were sending, a large amount. So I think the analysis or the model implied by your question is, okay, well, if I was sending 50 kilos or 100 kilos, does it make sense for me to go with Starship when, okay, well, Starship will have to do some kind of big logistics FedEx type operation of packaging your satellite into their giant system and then releasing it. And so there's a lot of extra cost in that you've got to factor in, which is why companies like Rocket Lab, for example, which has a small launcher, they can, they are a sub 200 kilogram class launcher right now with their Electron launcher, have managed to, maintain a position, because when all things are considered, actually they're still competitive. Even though the per kilo cost is much higher in a very kind of wholesale sense, all of the other costs to work with a Falcon 9 when you're at that scale, including timing and including manifest availability, can I get on that window at that time? Those things become costs that people want to pay for. So I think, but I really love that question, Benjamin. An analysis like that would be a great article. Actually, maybe I should write that. Edmund, not only do you have a great background, but a great question. So I think the best unit economics, it's a really good way of putting it. Right now, it's data, because people are really, people who run satellites are really hungry to find buyers of their data. And the applications are still a little bit young. And so in my view, the unit economics are pretty good. If you want, especially for an application outside the main use of that instrument. So for example, if you want a really, really complex, beautiful three-dimensional map with a multispectral camera for agriculture, you'll probably spend quite a bit of money for that. But if you just want part of that information, if you just want, for example, to get pictures of the sea for wave heights, or if you want to do something like bounce, receive the signals that come down from positioning and timing satellites that bounce off the Earth and come out again. And don't forget, these have timing signals in them, and they also have identities in them, and use that as a way of scanning the Earth. That's called radio occultation. The unit economics for those are actually really, really good. So data, I think, is one of those areas right now where you can get hold of data from companies right now, and if you have a specific application, it's not that expensive. The challenge is if you go in the front door and you say, okay, we want all the satellite imagery of this area, they'll give you the full price. But if you sort of say, we've got a specific application, we just need this data, we don't need anything else, and you can, find a way to get that data from satellite operators, that I think that has the best unit economics, almost free right now. Does one think about? Yeah, I think we do. We push for that. It's coming into view because of mass production. Previously, unit economics was probably not even something that people in space understood. So things like Starlink and things like Kuiper, and the fact that they may need to be, making 20, 50 spacecraft a day rather than one a year, is making everyone think about unit economics. But yeah, TAM and revenue is where most of the analyses are correct. I hope that helped answer that question, Edmund.
Welcome more questions in the chat or raise your hand. I'm gonna pop in with one again. Are there any publicly listed companies that are relevant, competitive, and interesting in the space market? My outsider's impression is that SpaceX is eating the prime contractor's lunch, and it looks pretty dreary for them. But tell me if there's some upside to Boeing and these folks. And then everything else are like, there's this rich ecosystem of new startups, but they're very early stage and not yet de-risked. Is there anywhere else to invest or to be looking or getting exposure besides those kind of three buckets, like the primes, SpaceX, and then everybody else?
Sure. So my personal, I was very interested in, and I follow this, what they call them, the space SPACs. That there was a sort of a SPAC bubble in Wall Street a few years ago, and I follow those pretty closely. And I think Rocket Lab was probably the winner out of that period. There is a great newsletter called Case Closed, which is a stock review of the different companies. There are other companies on the stock market that you can go through that space review. I've invested in a few of them. You've got Rocket Lab, you've got Planet Labs, you've got Redwire, you've got Intuitive Machines. I think it's been a very volatile sector. So these smaller companies have really had a bit of a wild ride. Rocket Lab has taken a deliberate approach of saying, well, our launch business is actually just a foundational piece of infrastructure for our spacecraft business and our solar panel business and these other upstream businesses that we actually think we're going to get more revenue from. And that is definitely how it's played out. So people don't seem to be making a lot of money from launch, but launch is giving them market power. And Rocket Lab, as I said, they went through that SPAC, they raised the money, and they immediately acquired a bunch of companies that were in the supply chain. And that's, I think, paid off for them. I think the other thing that you'll see from people like Maxar and BlackSky is that their valuations right now are not great. I think in some cases their valuations are below their annual revenues. And so, from a public markets perspective, it depends on whether you are seeing, okay, where we believe the upward trends that I've been describing, and I think that's, I definitely do believe those. But at what point do we want to risk this sort of volatile bottom of the bubble burst period, at what point do we think the direction is going to change? And I'm sure that's the same for space companies in the different bourses around the world. There's this sense that there's a huge opportunity for that, and you know, a huge growth potential, and all the data is pointing to that. But the mechanics of how that's going to come about are not well understood. And there is a default assumption, I think, by many investors that, oh, well, government's just going to be the main customer and they're going to buy off of them, and that's going to be where I'll get my return. And I'm not sure if that's, you know, that's clear. There's been a Trump bump, of course. Trump came in, Elon's right there. Oh, there's going to be some great opportunities in space. Oh, no, hang on a second. There's a whole lot of uncertainty. There's a whole lot of fear. So I think I can literally show you like a picture of this real quick. Let's see. They call it the Trump rally. And this is across all stocks, but this was something that people talk about. And I don't think space is immune from this at all. I don't think space is immune. So this is the Trump kind of bump where people were like, oh, great, we're going to sort of see a bullish, and now there's this uncertainty globally. So I think space isn't insulated from that at all. So right now, we're at a point where there's a lot of uncertainty. This is all from this Case Closed Substack that I mentioned before, and the actual space companies. We're sort of seeing a sort of a neutral outcome through this, through this period where people thought Trump, he's gonna make it big, and then oh no, maybe not. The legacy space went on the same journey, by the way. Your Lockheed Martin's, Northrop Grumman's, Boeing's, and so forth. Yeah, it's quite fascinating. Anyway, hopefully useful answer to your question.
Spectacularly. We're coming to the close. I want to thank Tim again for his time. And Tim, maybe just leave us with some final words that give us, if you have anything inspiring or positive to say about how humanity may show a higher angel of ourselves in space, in a time when our terrestrial, politics and economy have a lot of uncertainty. Do you have any optimism for humans in space?
I'll give you a poetic and a prosaic answer, and I'll start with the prosaic answer, which is just as we saw in air transport. The real politic around air transport was a recognition that there was more money to be made, there was more business and trade and benefit to be gained by signing up to an international traffic management regime than there was in terms of loss of sovereignty. So I think for me, the prosaic opportunity is to sort of say, I think we need to come together to have a civilian-led space ecosystem. We need to come together as a species, as a family of nations, and get past a lot of the issues that we've seen, a lot of the bad faith or the suspicion, and of course our own armed forces and our own governments are operating in ways to protect their own interests, which is completely entirely reasonable. But we've got to find a way to lift that conversation to that higher level. I think the poetic for me is that when people travel out to space, and increasingly we're going to be going alongside with them, using VR, using daily video. When people travel out to places like the moon and live there, they travel out to places like the moon, the Mars, which has got a big difference, in some cases up to half an hour time delay to talk back to the Earth. We're going to look back at the Earth. When you look back at the Earth from space, you don't see borders, you see rivers. You don't see conflicts, you see mountain ranges. You don't see, the Standard & Poor's 500. You see an atmosphere that we all share. So I think for me, the overview effect that you get from space is critically important, alongside, great questions like Edmund's around unit economics. That's all part of the one fabric. And I think that's the thing that I hope for, that space can bring us together as one species as we move out into the cosmos. And a small plug, in September this year in Sydney, we have the International Astronomical Congress, where we hope to have 10,000 people from all over the world. That's what it's looking like, come to be part of this exact conversation we just had, talking about all that might be commercially, scientifically, and socially, and the impact that space can have. Thank you so much for inviting me, Jonathan, and I've really enjoyed questions and being on the spot for you guys today.
Tim, thank you so much on behalf of the whole WOA community. This is really just a pleasure and a feast for the mind. And your prosaic and poetic answers do leave me feeling optimistic and inspired. So I'll either see you in Sydney or see you on the moon. I'm not sure which is closer, but look forward to it either way. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you very much. Thank you, guys.
All who've joined. We'll circulate the playback link afterwards. Thanks, Tim.
You're welcome. Cheers.